Over the past years, Africa has been reflecting on the challenges of post-conflict situations, driven by continental efforts to establish a specific policy framework. This framework aims to address the unique needs of post-conflict and post-crisis situations in line with the African Union Peace and Security Architecture and the African Governance Architecture. This commitment to lasting peace led to the adoption of the EU Policy Framework on Post-Conflict Reconstruction and Development in Banjul, Gambia, in 2006. In July 2012, the African Solidarity Initiative was established to coordinate financial contributions to this program at a continental level. Fast forward to September 2022 in Accra, Ghana, the EU Peace and Security Commission organized a workshop to review the post-conflict reconstruction and development framework. This workshop aimed to gain deeper insight into the new challenges that arise not only from evolving crises, but also from financing issues and the need for new forms of partnerships. It also explored the crucial roles of African actors in creating optimal conditions for the deployment of post-conflict reconstruction and development. However, the success of peace building in Africa depends on its implementation. Some post-conflict countries lack the necessary political will, both domestically and internationally. To overcome these challenges, leadership and the mobilization of national, regional and multilateral actors are crucial. This is where the African Peace and Security Annual Conference plays a pivotal role. The 7th edition of APSACO aims to deepen our understanding of the challenges and catalysts of post-conflict reconstruction in Africa. By focusing on these 4 key axes, APSACO provides a platform to share knowledge, foster partnerships, and develop comprehensive solutions for the security, political and socio-economic challenges of post-conflict reconstruction. Together, through collective efforts and a commitment to implementation, Africa can build a brighter future of lasting peace and prosperity. Join us at APSACO and be part of Africa's journey towards peace.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the African Peace and Security Conference, a conference organized by the Policy Center for the New South. The conference will begin with welcoming remarks. Please join me in welcoming on stage Mr. Rachid Houdaigui, Senior Fellow at the Policy Center for the New South. Mr. Rachid Houdaigui, the floor is yours.
Excellency, the great pleasure that I wish you a very warm welcome to the 7th edition of APSACO, African Peace Security Annual Conference. We are delighted to welcome you to this magnificent new building of the Policy Center of the New South, located at the Mohammed VI Polytechnic University. I'm delighted to see the great diversity of experts and organizations present today. So thank you for being here. For me, I am Professor Rachid Houdaigui, Senior Fellow at the Policy Center for the New South. I'm in charge of APSACO. I will present to you the logical framework of this conference, and it will be in Arabic. So I invite those among you who need translation to pick up their headphone. Okay. أصحاب الفخامة سيداتي سادتي.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear audience, the 7th session, the 7th edition of the African Peace and Security Annual Conference centers on the reconstruction and development in post-conflict situation. This edition comes within a special circumstance in which the African countries are living, continent that are highlighted by 3 major features. First, the slowness of the building of an independent social and collective security scheme. The African situation that capitalizes on the African situation, far from any kind of the imitation or the international donors.
الجديدة
The new social dimensions of conflicts management requires. Apparently, there is a problem of translation that maybe people cannot hear. Now, interpreters are translating, and the microphone is on, and it should be. Translation is on. Maybe some people only cannot hear, in which case, please, if some of you can hear, could you confirm? Interpreters are ready. Can you hear? Can you hear us, please?
Can you tell me if it's okay or not? Not yet.
Apparently not yet. Interpreters are ready and more than willing to do their jobs. We've started translating ever since the beginning, but apparently our voices cannot hear you. Please bear with us.
Organized a workshop to review the post-conflict reconstruction and development framework. This workshop aimed to gain deeper insight into the new challenges that arise not only from evolving crises, but also from financing issues and the need for new forms of partnerships. It also explored the crucial roles of African actors in creating optimal conditions for the deployment of post-conflict reconstruction and development. However, the success of peace building in Africa depends on its implementation. Some post-conflict countries lack the necessary political will, both domestically and internationally. To overcome these challenges, leadership and the mobilization of national, regional, and multilateral actors are crucial. This is where the African Peace and Security Annual Conference plays a pivotal role. The 7th edition of APSACO aims to deepen our understanding of the challenges and catalysts of post-conflict reconstruction in Africa. By focusing on these 4 key axes, APSACO provides a platform to share knowledge, foster partnerships, and develop comprehensive solutions for the security, political, and socio-economic challenges of post-conflict reconstruction. Together, through collective efforts and a commitment to implementation, Africa can build a brighter future of lasting peace and prosperity. Join us at APSACO and be part of Africa's journey towards peace. Over the past years, Africa has been reflecting on the challenges of post-conflict situations, driven by continental efforts to establish a specific policy framework. This framework aims to address the unique needs of post-conflict and post-crisis situations in line with the African Union Peace and Security Architecture and the African Governance Architecture. This commitment to lasting peace led to the adoption of the EU Policy Framework on Post-Conflict Reconstruction and Development in Banjul, Gambia, in 2006. In July 2012, the African Solidarity Initiative was established to coordinate financial contributions to this program at a continental level. Fast forward to September 2022 in Accra, Ghana, the EU Peace and Security Commission organized a workshop to review the post-conflict reconstruction and development framework. This workshop aimed to gain deeper insight into the new challenges that arise not only from evolving crises, but also from financing issues and the need for new forms of partnerships. It also explored the crucial roles of African actors in creating optimal conditions for the deployment of post-conflict reconstruction and development. However, the success of peace building in Africa depends on its implementation. Some post-conflict countries lack the necessary political will, both domestically and internationally. To overcome these challenges, leadership and the mobilization of national, regional and multilateral actors are crucial. This is where the African Peace and Security Annual Conference plays a pivotal role. The 7th edition of APSACO aims to deepen our understanding of the challenges and catalysts of post-conflict reconstruction in Africa. By focusing on these 4 key axes, APSACO provides a platform to share knowledge, foster partnerships, and develop comprehensive solutions for the security, political and socio-economic challenges of post-conflict reconstruction. Together, through collective efforts and a commitment to implementation, Africa can build a brighter future of lasting peace and prosperity. Join us at APSACO and be part of Africa's journey towards peace.
She said that, no, not yet. Huh?
Mesdames, Messieurs,
Patients, please make sure that your translation headsets are on. And on the right side of the set, number 1 is for English, number 2 is for French, and number 3 is for Arabic. The session will begin shortly. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, all right. So,
Mr. Rachid Houdaigui, the floor is yours.
thank you. Sayyidati Anisati said that.
ladies and gentlemen, the 7th session of the annual conference of the African Peace and Security Annual Conference on the topic of reconstruction and post-conflict development comes in a special circumstances and conditions in which Africa is going through, marked by 3 main features. First, a slowness in the setup of an independent collective social peace and security system, which is based on the African and international situation. This system, which is far from any imitation or allegiance to the conditions set by the donors. Mostly that the conflicts management requires a special vision and a renewed vision from the African decision makers. It has thus become necessary to adopt a strategic consensus. The reconstruction effort is complex, so much so that the needs to combine efforts from governments as well as from the African Union and international organizations. And regional organization is a long-term and complex consensus-based agreement. The second salient fact is the differences in the building of peace in Africa. Africa is using a mechanism of negotiations, including the African APSA structure, the African Commission for 2063, the initiatives of bringing the arms to a halt, and the African solidarity and the African framework for the reconstruction post-conflict situations. But the balance still remains different from one area to another, because our continent is going through conflicts, as you know, that are unfinished and ongoing up until today. The problem is one of structural nature. In fact, there is a blatant difference between the objectives that are set and the political willingness, not to mention also the means used to reaching the objectives. The real challenge today is the implementation and the proceduralization of these activities, and mostly the African PCRD, the African Framework of Reconstruction. The third component challenges the role of the African knowledge societies, including the think tanks, academia. The current situation calls on all of these centers, research centers and think tanks, and to work together, to bring their efforts together in order to know first and to overcome post-conflict situations and to anticipate them, in fact. But today's reality is also found in the fact that the ambitions and the African challenges are transcending and more than the institutional and the political and social possibilities of the continent. Hence, the efforts undertaken for joint and consistent willingness are coming across and met with numerous problems of geopolitical nature, economic nature, and the like. And here comes out the role of the knowledge societies in setting up a constructive critics and the contribution by all countries for setting up African mechanisms. And in passing, it is worth mentioning that the PCNS considers that the peace building are two very important axes of thought. Over and above the publications and the congresses and the meetings, the PCNS is imposing itself as an active player on the African continent and chessboard. It has contributed to the review of the post-conflict reconstruction that has been discussed in Accra in September 2022 and has been adopted in May 2023 in Cairo after its final approval at the African Heads of States meeting that is slated to take place next February. The African Union has recently made public the launch of the reconstruction and peace in post-conflict situations in Cairo, the capital of Egypt. The center is therefore working under the auspices of the AU in order to set up and to assess the project for reconstructions and development in the post-conflict country situations. We pin high hopes on the fact that this center will be able to set up the operational and conceptual framework for the peace building and the reconstruction post-conflict situation. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear audience, we are seeking that this meeting becomes a venue of assessment, bringing together and the maintaining of assiduous exchanges between and from outside Africa, whereby these discussions during this meeting will allow us to talk about and overcome the current situations and difficulties and come out with operational recommendations. The main axes and avenues of talk shines a spotlight on the different situations, including the following components. First, how can we develop the African concept of collective peace through the study of current cases in post-conflict situations on the continent? Second, what prototype and model of setting up democratic countries and maintaining these situations? And thirdly, how can we set up a legal scientific-based system that will be able to do monitoring and evaluation. Fourthly, how can we beef up the role and increase the role of women and the youth in the peace building and peace maintaining activities from the very beginning? How can we set up and maintain and encourage the financing mechanisms that are both conventional and alternative in order to start reconstruction in post-conflict situations? Sixthly, how can we reach the cooperation between the United Nations Peace Building Commission and the African Union in reconstruction in post-conflict situation? And what are the different possibilities and horizons for the contribution of African Union countries? Last but not least, a whole part of the meeting will discuss about the African report published by the PCNS. I would like to thank you before I end my talk, and thank you for your very fruitful debates. And I wish us, and I wish you, a very nice stay amongst us here in Morocco. Thank you for your kind attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming on stage Her Excellency Catherine Samba-Panza, former President of the Central African Republic, and Mrs. Mounia Boucetta, Senior Fellow at the Policy Center for the New South, for the opening conversation.
J'ai l'immense plaisir d'accueillir. Dear audience, I have the great pleasure of welcoming Catherine Samba-Panza. We are delighted to welcome you here in this introductory session as an African leader of an African woman, and you are an attorney. You have worked in the insurance sector. You were president of the transition of the Central African Republic from 2014 to 2016. So we will have this moment. And first of all, I'd like to thank you for your presence and your availability to discuss your political experience, and we'll cover a few milestones to address these post-conflict and post-crisis issues, and maybe draw the best lessons, as it's been mentioned by Mr. Houdaigui. And what lessons could we draw from all of the actions that were carried out for peace and security, and also maybe open up an outlook on how we can construct African states, what are the best mechanisms that ensure sustainability for these actions. So we're going to take a step back. And so in 2014, the Central African Republic, which is in the heart of Africa, which is surrounded by 6 countries and which boasts many natural resources, uranium, gold, diamonds, but after the independence has unfortunately experienced a very tense geopolitical context, especially 2013, where there were successive political crises. There was also generalized violence, massive displacement of populations. And in 2014, you decided to present yourself as a candidate in this challenging context. So what were the reasons behind this choice, and what more can you tell us? Before answering your question, please allow me to express my heartfelt gratitude to the Kingdom of Morocco for its warm welcome. And especially, I'd like to express my gratitude to the organizing committee from the Policy Center for all of the logistics measures that have been taken to make my trip and my stay within this university a pleasant experience. It's a real honor for me to be able to share with this eminent assembly my modest experience as a female political leader, because this is something that we'll be rediscussing, and that has had to lead her country, as you've very well recalled, in a particularly challenging context. Many people were, in fact, astonished to see that while there were violations in the country, human rights violations, armed groups that were killing each other, political parties that were fighting to conserve power, that women from civil society that had no political background managed to lead the state during this time. You also spoke about my experience leading this transition, but there was also an important milestone that is worth mentioning that explains quite a few things. So the time that I spent at the Bangui mayorship, where I worked side by side with the Bangui population that was in great distress, and where I had to try to address their concerns and expectations. And given my commitment within civil society, women, children, the most underprivileged, well, this sort of sustained my leadership and allowed women, and I'm saying again, women, to come see me in great delegations. So women from all faiths. There were Catholics, there were Protestants, there were Muslims. There was a group of 12 women from the religious platform for Central Africa at a time where there were intercommunity issues, interfaith issues, and it was this group of women that came to see me at a time where I was the least expecting it, to tell me, Madame Samba-Panza, men have failed. We would like for women to take the lead and try to extract this country from chaos. So if it's a man that takes leadership in this current context, given what we know about the political ambitions of all of the involved parties, we will not make it. I mean, we wish for your female leadership to serve the cause of our country. Naturally, I was saying that my female leadership from civil society is not political in nature. And this is something we can discuss later on with respect to my background. I mean, my experiences in my background is in civil society, in the private sector, but I don't have a political background per se. And I was a little taken aback by this plea, but I also felt obliged to respond to this solicitation from my sisters. And this is how I ended up accepting as a citizen to take on this role and this duty at this time of the transition. But based on the questions you'll ask me, we can rediscuss the other aspects. So we felt in your declarations, whenever you spoke about your term, you said that I have one mission. So what does this mission entail? So it's a great mission. I mean, for women that are in fact the first victims of violence, along with their children and their communities, to come see you and say, Madame Samba-Panza, we count on you to get us out of this challenging situation. And my second consideration of the mission is that these are women from different faiths. I mean, I am a Christian woman. I'm a committed woman. This is something that's very meaningful for me because these are women of different faiths that came to see me to tell me that we need your leadership. So I consider this as a real mission, and I needed to take on this mission. So today, with some hindsight, what do you believe was maybe missing for you to successfully complete your mission as you would have wished? Was it financial resources? Was it strengthening the security of law enforcement? What was missing? So when I arrived during this transition back in 2014 to January 2014, it was to complete the transition process that had started 2 years prior with two other actors before me. And so this is why the women had said that the men had failed, because there were two actors that were in charge of handling this transition period, and there were indeed quite a few challenges. And so when I arrived, I took on this transition midway. And so this transition that had been launched since January 11, 2013, on the occasion of the Libreville Agreement. And so when it was implemented in 2013, it was for an 18-month period. And so this transition was supposed to be completed in February 2015. And I was elected on January 14, 2014. And so this transition, when it was launched, well, there was a roadmap that was defined by the heads of state and head of government from the Central African community, and so it was very specific to the return that entailed quite a few things: dialogue, national reconciliation, the reform of the judiciary, the implementation of a real administration within the country, to organize elections, and engage in social and economic reforms. And so when I arrived, this is the roadmap that I needed to embark on for a year period. And so I had to reestablish it and reshape it and adapt it to the context. And so in my revised roadmap, I prioritized the return to peace and security. That was indeed extremely important, the return of the displaced persons that were in refugee camps all over the place. And so because we considered that these were 3-star hotels for these poor populations. And so we also needed reconciliation, dialogue, consultation, and reconciliation. So when I arrived, I could not decide alone on the program that needed to be implemented, because I needed to revise this great, huge program. And I needed a consultation with all of the actors that were involved in the crisis: armed groups, political parties, religious organizations, women, youth, etc. And so I needed to consult with the nation's vital forces to identify together which were the priorities, and among these priorities, what needed to be further prioritized and what we needed to start out with. It was extremely important. I was obliged to start from there. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had the consensus of the other actors involved in the crisis. But did time play in your favor? Because given the consultation process, I do understand and that as women leaders, we try to do things in the best possible conditions and to head towards a consensus. But was time in your favor? No, unfortunately, time was not in my favor. So if you realize I arrived on January 14, 2014, and I needed to organize elections, general elections, presidential and legislative elections. At the very latest, on February 15th, not even 2015. And so the transition needed to be completed. It was virtually impossible. It was unrealistic. I still accepted, telling myself that we needed to negotiate with those that support us in the framework of regional African mediation. in order to obtain more time because we were locked in these the constitution that was enshrined for the transition, and there was a whole process whereby, there was the Central African mediator who back then it was the president of the Congo, and obtained the approval of the heads of state of the Economic Community of Central African States, and there was a first extension, 6-month extension, and then a second 6-month extension. And sometimes we considered that if we successfully managed to organize the elections, well, that the process is already completed. So unfortunately, organizing elections are not enough to establish democracy, but this was simply to lower the tension, because the government that preceded me was a part of a rebellion, and so indeed it was very important to be able to get back to a new constitutional order, and so to vote on this new constitution, given that the former one was suspended, and organize legislative elections, because we needed a new national assembly to allow the transition assembly to leave, and so there were quite a lot of challenges. There was a lot at stake. There were many challenges to overcome, but my team and myself, well, we decided to take on this challenge, and this was absolutely necessary. Now, at the same time, we're wondering whether we should give enough time to the transition, but we are afraid for this transition to become a standard. So where is the middle ground in these post-conflict situations in the management of the transition? What do you believe is the best approach to handle this period in order to ensure sustainable peace and security? So in the constitutional charter, there is a bottleneck. The authorities from the transition are not allowed to present themselves in the elections following the transition. So even if I were working for 24 months, even if I had made the best decisions, in the end, I was not allowed to present myself to the elections. So obviously, I have received many demands from my collaborators and from the sub-region African community telling me, well, Madame Samba-Panza, we do know that the time of this transition is very short. Do you wish for us to change the constitutional charter to allow you to have more time to implement your vision and to implement your roadmap? And so I answered as follows, and I said, well, I am an attorney. And so when I arrived, I knew the rules, and I knew that this transition was for an 18-month period with a possibility to extend it twice. I accepted the rules of the game, and as an attorney, I shall not change the Constitution to stay in power. I will do what I can, and then at the end I shall withdraw. And so I organized the elections, I installed the new authorities, and then I withdrew. And so there was also another element that we noted in your mandate, in your mission, is that even after the organization of the elections, the election of the new president, you continued working through mobilizing international organizations, to mobilize resources in order to support this new government. And I believe that this is testimony of real leadership, where you were committed all the way. Due to the recurring crises that occurred, and with the intervention of the international community, we benefited from consolidation fund, in fact, thanks to Morocco as well. There was also a mobilization to support the Central African Republic, and this was an eternal restarting. There was constantly a new crisis, and we need to start from scratch. And so there was a certain lassitude from the international community to support the Central African Republic. I needed to engage in lots of advocacy and diplomatic action to replace the Central African Republic on the forefront of the international agenda. And so we started seeing the support and of the international community once again. And so we had the support of the World Bank, of the IMF, of the European Union, the United Nations, in order to carry out this transition. I must say that I was very afraid. I was afraid that there would be a disruption and that the country could no longer benefit from this this financial support, this human support, that would be delivered to the Central African Republic. And so I figured that it was important to go and turn to partners and tell them that the Central African Republic, at the end of this transition, shall still need to be part of this of the international community's agenda. So here are the needs that we will have after the transition, and I count on you to continue to provide your support. I want to see the IMF, the World Bank, the United Nations, and to tell them that I need your support because the population needs quite a few projects for its basic needs. And so the Central African Republic still needs security assistance. It still needs support for the reform of the security sector, etc. And so I made this trip while I was actually completing my term, and many people were quite astonished by that move on my end. And so just to discuss this issue of fragility, so far you've strived to implement roadmaps to establish strategies, but we still know that there was this prevailing fragility as far as the security or political stability. And so, which begs the question, I mean, we do know that time was of the essence, and that was a major constraint, but also socioeconomic development projects, because we do know that the population has expectations, they have aspirations, and so we were wondering in such a reconstruction process, I mean, between the security and economic issues, how can you reconcile these two? Because without security, there wouldn't be any investments, there wouldn't be any development. But at the same time, many studies have shown that these fragilities that are established themselves are, in fact, due to because there was no response to this socioeconomic development. So, in your opinion, what was the role of economic issues in your roadmap, and how do you think is the best way to reconcile, I mean, economic issues and socio-development issues? So when we take leadership of a country which is in this context, I mean, we are in fact split between emergencies, handling security emergencies, humanitarian emergencies, and reconciliation priorities with peace, consultation, and dialogue. And the emergency of replacing the country, of reestablishing this new order, this new constitutional order. I mean, in the justice reforms and whatnot, economic reforms, are last in line, and that was the case for myself, and it was also the case for the roadmap of the economic community. So my first emergency was to put an end to hostilities, to avoid for populations to suffer from violence, from violations of their rights. This was extremely important. And then we also needed to bring back the displaced persons to their country. I mean, so populations were completely scattered. I mean, women were giving birth in the forest. I mean, diseases were spreading at an alarming rate. I mean, it was very difficult, and the populations had needs in terms of education, in terms of health. They had basic needs, and this was all very important. But furthermore, if we didn't devise, income-generating projects for these populations, well, they would constantly be relying on the assistance of humanitarian associations and organizations. So you have all of these priorities that need to be synchronized. And so which one should be prioritized among these priorities? But we all have to tackle them all. And in a sense, well, this also poses a certain scattering, but I considered that the security emergency was the most important. So in Bangui, in the provinces, nobody could move around without being attacked. Especially ethno-religious issues. There was this vengeance. And so these were very difficult issues to handle for the population. We needed to lower the tensions. We need to bring back peace in the heart of the populations that were really suffering, that no longer wanted to see their Christian or Muslim brothers that needed to be shot down. And so this discourse of social cohesion, of national reconciliation, of consultation, constant, on a constant basis was absolutely necessary. So now we will proceed to a third step of your political discourse. So we're in 2020, and so you are representing yourself to the presidency as a candidate, and so it's not the mission but rather the ambition. So what ambitions did you have for this position?
Yeah, when I ran as a candidate to the 2020 election, of course, there was only generals up in the press. And apparently policies was not his cup of tea, that she didn't like politics. How come she is running as candidate to an election? Yeah, first, I have to put back the context in which this sentence have been made. It's not, of course, that I don't like politics, but it was not my cup of tea because a Jeune Afrique journalist asked me, post-transition, what are you going to do? What activities are you going to have? As I said, since politics is not my cup of tea, I would like and come back to my first activity: civil society organizations, commitment for democracy, commitment for human rights, etc., etc. This is what I've always done as a member of civil society. Now then, what has motivated me to become a candidate in 2020? During the transition, we did organize the popular community consultations, grassroots, that has allowed all of the populations, the communities, the villages on there to ask them about the vision of the Central African Republic, on their priorities and expectations, starting from these elements that were gleaned from the population. We did organize the National Burundi Forum. During this forum, we have entered into an agreement about the main avenues of works and axis of action, and we have sketched out the Central African Republic that we really wanted for the next year, for the following years. So starting from the Bangui National Forum that we have designed, the Constitution and the Electoral Code, accounting for a certain number of points of view that have been aired and voiced out here and there by the populations. Now, the recommendations of the Bangui National Forum did constitute the framework of reconstruction of the Central African Republic and the development of the Central African Republic, around which and upon which everyone did agree. Everything was set for the next 20, 30 years, so they said. The institutions that came had only to put themselves in this mold, shape, that has required a lot of thought and reflection from the population. Now, 6 months on, I heard say here and there that a rupture was necessary, distancing ourselves with all of the decisions made by the transition. And I found so challenged what rupture, because I did not represent a political party with a vision, and it is within the framework of the consultations that we have agreed on a certain number of priorities for the country. If there is a rupture and if there is a break with everything we've done, it means that everything was going to not be accounted for and be discarded. So my conscience as a citizen, a woman, a political figure, quote unquote, but mostly of the person myself, who has guided a transition and who thinks legitimately to have reached a certain number of solutions and proposals. So I said it is my duty to come back and to implement everything that we have agreed to as part of a consensus over time, and in view of the results that I have reached, which according to the other persons, was not alive with the other investments made, technical, etc. So I told myself, maybe it was not the right momentum. When Mrs. Samba-Panza is known to everyone, of course, I did have a capital that I could use and make positive use of. But from the beginning, I was asked, why are you running against someone who has, so they said, all of the electoral administration and public at his palm, if I may say, and who could organize the elections and get them and get the results the way he or she wanted. I was not the only one, by the way. I was deterred, dissuaded, and everyone was telling me, of course, well, maybe it's not the right time. And I said, why? There are about 30 or so candidates. Now, the co-constitutional, of course, was removed, and we had only 17. All of these candidates were in the same situation. Myself, Samba-Panza, other women, 16 other women. So I ran as another political woman, and to set the example by encouraging the Central African women, telling them Mrs. Samba-Panza ran as a candidate to those elections. It is a model that she set, and you can follow that model. But I did not want to become a candidate alone. I supported 100 or so candidate women to the legislative elections, and I've given them also the needs and the means to compete with the other candidates, men, albeit afterward there were only 12 women MPs or deputies, but at least there's that commitment and that very presence within the political sphere by Central African women. The messages that I conveyed through have allowed me to recall to the population, to the communities, to the political classes that altogether we did agree on a certain number of vision statements for our country, and hence that we should show respect to the commitments and be alive to the words that we have given on a political chessboard. If it were to be done again, would you have followed the same path? Maybe things you would have done otherwise? Yes, definitely. You know, in light of the experience that we have, in hindsight, we always try to improve what we have done, because when you are acting in haste, you lack experience. So in light of the experience that I have had, I can, in hindsight, certainly revisit and improve on a certain number of things. That's also women's leadership, because to recognize and acknowledge that there are avenues of work to improve. So this certainly is very telling of the seeking of ongoing improvement. So we've almost reached the end of this debate. In the post-conflict reconstruction and post-crisis reconstruction, the transition, so the management of the transition, how can you do that? And also, can you say a word about the women's leadership? Because this is also very important in crisis management, but also in the post-conflict reconstruction and post-crisis reconstruction. Definitely. Let's take the example of the Central African Republic, an unstable country with recurring crises since 1965. The Central African Republic has been in recurring crisis while we have benefited from the international community's support for peacekeeping operations, consolidate peace building, post-conflict programs, fragile states, brutal state, etc., etc. So still today, there is a recurrence of conflicts in Central Africa. I think we are the the very embodiment of the post-conflicts and the fragile and the brittle state in always in ever reconstruction. So we have to ask ourselves on the modes of resolution of the conflicts that we've had before, on the way of on the mediation styles that were brought both by the international community as well the African community, likewise, and also on the priorities of whatever actions to be undertaken for the post-conflict and post-crisis reconstruction. All this, I view it as important. And I think this way, in the analysis of the conflicts that we in the Central African Republic we've undertaken, I thought and I said we have to identify, to zero in on those risk factors, to pinpoint on the risk factors, very important. If we really identify them and that we do not treat them and go and try to nip them in the bud, they'll come back again. If we don't really heal the crisis factors, wouldn't have resolved the problem. So this is very important, therefore, to act on those factors of crisis and to find, at least to try and find solutions. But when I see the factors of crisis in our country, in my country, there's governance problems, political governance, administrative governance, economic governance, and what have you. There are governance problems. By political governance, what I mean that there are a lot of frustrations within and amongst the political classes that are that feel to have been forlorn, to have been put on the sidelines, because it's always the same chessboard persons, it's always the winners who are celebrating their victories for tens of years and who leave the other players on the sidelines. The world of exclusivity is a problem, and I'm not talking about inclusivity. I'm not talking about gender inclusivity, but political inclusivity, youth inclusivity, and armed groups inclusivity, etc., of the other actors who are feeling frustrated and who showcase their miscontent by taking to the arms. In the Central African Republic, the last rebellion was mainly caused to the imbalance of the regional developments. There are whole chunks of the country that are abandoned with very, very few or low or no access to these regions, who are landlocked and who so feel that they are cut off from the central administration. The regions that have demonstrated have came to Sudan, to Chad, where they have been using, of course, the Sudanese currency or the Chadian Arabic language, etc., etc. These are populations that feel themselves not anymore Central African and have nothing to do anymore with the central administration of the CAR, with the Central African Republic. That's also been a reaction, a triggering element or component. Plus, there's also the dissatisfaction and non-meeting of the essential needs of the populations, education-wise, health-wise, essential needs-wise. So these populations are in the most extreme poverty, and poverty is another important element to account for. If we would not allow the population to come out from the shackles of the poverty, any effort we would be doing is going to be vain. And we need to have a dialogue. We need to have ongoing consultation. What I've done during transition, for having been a president of the Follow-up and Dialogue Commission, for having been involved in several reconciliation processes, I have seen that all of the thematics, all of the organizational dialogue were top-down, are being imposed to the population. I am saying we have to go up, bottom up, from the grassroots. What are the populations expecting? How can they see and for this dialogue? And I put justice in the middle. Dialogue up there, reconciliation, grassroots, and justice in the middle. Thank you very much, Excellency, for this very candid exchange and for all of the lights that you have shed on this topic, for your generosity. Thank you. I think we're now going to go to the following sessions. Thank you. And soon, I'm sorry not to have been able to have covered all of the other aspects of the transition. It was too short a time and so many things to say. I can talk hours and hours because this is what I have lived through.
We kindly invite you to join us on stage for a group photo.
Over the past years, Africa has been reflecting on the challenges of post-conflict situations, driven by continental efforts to establish a specific policy framework. This framework aims to address the unique needs of post-conflict and post-crisis situations in line with the African Union Peace and Security Architecture.